Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our noon lunchtime talks. So some of you are welcome. Hopefully you're having a good lunch and kicking back and getting ready to start happy hour in a little bit. So we're going to get going here in a moment. You'll see that I'm joined by three amazing human beings with us today. We have Stephen Alton, who for me is in the lower right of my Hollywood squares. I'm not sure how it looks for all of you. And then to Stephen's left for me is Noe Perez. Noe, will you wave your hand? And then Lynn Castle up in the top right for me. And so I'm going to introduce Stephen first and let Stephen take it away. Caleb, if you wouldn't mind removing the spotlights from Noe and Lynn just while Stephen, thank you. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a quick, hitting three different talks over the hour. Each of these speakers will be sharing a topic of their choice about their collection, whether from their museum or their home or their work. So this is going to be a fun and fast way to learn a lot about them and what they do. Also, if you have questions for them, please pop them in the chat feature. We will address those after each speaker. So today, first off, we're joined by Stephen Alton. Stephen and his wife, Judy, are both early Texas art enthusiasts. They live in Fort Worth, Texas, where Stephen is a law professor at Texas A&M University Law School, and Judy is a retired attorney. Stephen is a past chair of the board of CASETA. Thank you, Stephen. And the primary focus of the Alton's art collection is works on paper that were produced by Texas artists before 1970. So I'm going to share my screen and let Stephen take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah Beth. I hope everyone can hear me and see me okay. And then I see the painting, the work has popped up there to my left on the screen. Thank you. You know, this is I love the CASETA Symposium, and every year it just gets better and better. And under very difficult conditions this year, you've just done great. These presentations have been wonderful. Dr. Mark Castro, oh my gosh, what a tough act to follow. And it doesn't help that my friend Howard Taylor set us all up as experts. I'm just shooting for competency, frankly, but I'll do the best I can. My assignment was to take one image, one painting, or one work on paper from my collection and share it with you and talk about it. And I'll talk for, I hope, about only 10 minutes, and then I hope I'll have a few minutes to answer your questions. And Judy, my wife, is sitting right off screen there, and she can join me in answering questions or correct me when I'm wrong or hold up a piece of paper to tell me I've forgotten something or said something I shouldn't have. In any event, as Sarah Beth said, our primary focus in collecting art are works on paper produced by Texas artists, mainly between 1920 and 1960, mainly prints. But our collection also contains other works beyond those years and other works in other media, some sculpture, some oil paintings, and this one I'm going to speak to you about is an oil painting. And then, as I said, my assignment was just to take one work and only one work to talk to you about. But as some of you can tell, I've worked in a second work, which I am wearing. This is a 1976 bolo in silver by Otis Dozier of a Wild Turkey. So I'm just, there's a sculpture, there's a relief that's in my work, in our collection. So why am I talking to you today about the painting when we collect and focus so much on works on paper? I want to explain in a moment why this painting represents many of the things that we look for when we collect prints, drawings, and indeed any work of art. And some of those are some of the things we look for: image, condition, value, provenance, connections between artists, even connections between art collectors. And we'll talk about all that in a moment. Judy and I began collecting, each individually began collecting works on paper before we were married. Then we began collecting works on paper by Texas artists after we were married in 1994. And I've heard on more than one occasion, Atlee Phillips has referred to works on paper as the gateway drug in the art collecting world. And with apologies to our friend Atlee, Judy and I don't view works on paper merely as a gateway to, say, oils. Instead, we love collecting works on paper for their own qualities, for their own merits. And there are a number of things that as I said, we've looked at, and we continue to look at when we add a work to our collection. A work on paper or any work has inherent aesthetic qualities: image, line, drafting, color, and if it's a working color as opposed to, say, a print or a drawing in black and white. For work on paper, for a print, unlike an oil painting, if an artist makes a mistake in a work on paper, it can't be so easily disguised as it could. It can't just be painted over as the artist could in an oil painting. Often, if an artist makes a mistake in a plate or a block, they just have to throw away the plate or the block and start over again. Another thing that we look for, and one of the things we like, frankly, on works on paper about, is indeed their value and affordability. And that has allowed us to build a collection that is both broad and deep. Connections are other things we look for. The ability to collect groups of artists who may be exhibited together, like the Lone Star Printmakers or the Texas Printmakers Guild, to collect teachers and their students. We've heard Dr. Castro talked about some of those connections, and indeed Ellen and Francine talked about some of those connections earlier this morning. An example might be, that might not be so obvious, is Everett Spruce and his student Jim Woodson. Both of whom are represented in our collection. We also like other connections like Teachers to Teachers, that wonderful group of artists that Ward Lockwood put together to found the UT Art Department before World War II is an example. We also like other connections. We like the ability to collect prints and perhaps the works on paper, the preliminary drawings, or even the final drawings for those prints. And it's wonderful when we can get the print and get the drawing, and we that on which it's based. And we have a number of those works in our collection. It's also fun just to discover the print or the painting's provenance, the history, the exhibition history, the place in the artist's overall general body of work. You might call it, I can use that fancy French term, oeuvre, the artist's body of work. And sometimes we can even spot the prior ownership of that specific edition of the print, which is nice to know. Condition's important, condition's crucial, but it doesn't necessarily scare us. It doesn't necessarily deter us. We always try to collect works on paper that are in excellent condition. But sometimes in the case of a rare print or a rare work on paper, we just have to take the condition as we find it and hope we can get it conserved later on, which we often can. We also like to collect works on paper, particularly unframed, so that we can more easily see their condition. And in addition, maybe add a frame that's maybe more appropriate. Maybe we can find a period frame if we don't have the original frame. Now, to the painting, to the work that you see on your screen before you, that is Ethel Edwards' Blue Monday, 1939, oil on canvas. Why did I pick this image to speak with you all about today? Because it illustrates so many of the qualities that we look for when we decide to add any work of art to our collection. And these include the following. First off, the aesthetic quality of the image. This painting, actually, this painting is lighted. This is a very good photograph of it, but it's lighted. Actually, the photograph makes it slightly lighter than it is. It really is a darker painting in person, and it's dark and it's moody and somewhat somber. It's almost monochromatic. It depicts this decorous nude who turns her head away from the viewer. There's a black dog curled up at her feet, and it's not necessarily obvious on first looking that black form at her feet is in fact a dog. I wonder if the work's title, Blue Monday, dark tonality, the black dog, perhaps all allude to depression or unhappiness. I don't know, but the painting invites you to consider that. After all, who amongst us hasn't awakened on Monday morning and thought, we don't want to get dressed and get up and go to work, and we're kind of sad about it. Maybe that's what she was thinking. I don't know. Judy thought maybe her boyfriend had spent the weekend and he had just left and she was unhappy about that. I don't know. At the very least, the relative darkness of the work makes us look somewhat harder to discern the iconography, and that effort draws us into the deeper scene in that painting, draws us more deeply into that scene in the painting. The painting, as you can see, contains various textures, lines, dots, chevrons, cross-hatchings. And those textures are those that might be found in a painting by the French painter Edouard Williard. I'm going to have more to say about the Williard connection in just a moment. Value and affordability. I certainly won't talk about the price of this painting, But I will say that we bought it privately a few years after it had failed to sell at auction, and the price was lower than the low auction estimate. And we believe that the painting, which was framed in a very plain black frame that was clearly not its original frame, the frame handicapped that work at auction. We recently were able to reframe this painting to replace that black frame with a much a more elaborate but still very appropriate dark frame, one that's reminiscent of frames that we see on some of the old masterworks in some of the museums, including one or two at the Campbell here in Fort Worth. So I think that reframing has done a lot to help the overall aesthetic quality of that painting, and thereby, in effect, it helps enhance the overall condition of that painting. Now, let me get back to connections. I want to talk about connections in this work and provenance, and they're inextricably linked in this work. The artist was Ethel Edwards, and Ethel Edwards was a student of first a student and then the wife of Javier Gonzalez, whom many of you know and who has been referred to this morning. Gonzalez was in turn the nephew of the Spanish Texas artist Jose Arpa, and per Dr. Castro, I've learned that Medellin was a student of both Gonzalez and Arpa, and that was very interesting, and that's a further connection that interests me. The model of this painting was Alice Reynolds. She sat for this painting. She was a fellow student of Gonzalez, and she was a very good friend of Edwards and Gonzalez. In fact, Reynolds was the maid of honor at the wedding of Edwards and Gonzalez, which took place in Alpine, Texas during one of the summer art colonies, I guess maybe either in the late 20s or more likely sometime in the 1930s there in Alpine at what's now Sul Ross State University. So for many years, I understand this painting hung in Alice Reynolds' Albany, Texas home. And Judy and I acquired it directly from Alice Reynolds' niece, Suzanne Dietz, whom some of you may know. A label on the back of the painting has a tantalizing clue. Speaking of provenance, it indicates that this painting was entered into a juried competition for exhibition in the Contemporary American Art wing of the 1939 New York World's Fair. I've looked at numerous lists of the art exhibited, paintings exhibited at the World's Fair, and I cannot find this painting on any of those lists. It makes me think that this probably was not accepted for exhibition at the New York World's Fair, that it was rejected. It was entered but not accepted. I don't know. I'm going to continue doing research, and I hope to turn up the fact that indeed it was exhibited, but I'm not certain of that. Now back to French artist Edouard Vuillard. Vuillard was an extremely well-known French painter in his day, which was the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, first part of the 20th century. He was he certainly would have been known. His works he was a contemporary of Jose Arpa, more or less. Certainly his works would have been known to Jose Arpa, and probably directly Javier Gonzalez as well. If not, Gonzalez could have learned about Vuillard from his uncle Jose. Certainly Ethel Edwards, this seems to be influenced somewhat by Vuillard's work, that Blue Monday. And Ethel Edwards, if she didn't know about Vuillard before, perhaps learned about Vuillard from Gonzalez, her teacher, and her husband. So connections indeed. Finally, I want to say a quick word about a personal connection with this work. Our friends Gail and Jack Davis, whom many of you know, first called our attention to the fact that Suzanne Dietz, Alice Reynolds' niece, was open to an offer to purchase this painting. And this is an example of how collectors can help each other in their collecting. It also represents an example of the role that organizations like CASETA, like TACO, like HETAG play in disseminating knowledge about Texas art and in bringing like-minded people together. As collectors, Judy and I are grateful to those organizations and also to the Texas museums, curators, dealers in art, all of whom have helped play a role in our own art education, in training our own eye. So I hope it's now, at least in this few minutes that I had to visit with you, I hope it's now clear why I chose this painting to speak with you about today, even though it's not a work on paper. It is, works on paper being the main focus of our collection, but this painting does exhibit many of the qualities that we look for when we collect works of art, be it a work on paper, be it a sculpture, be it an oil painting, be it a bolo by Otis Dozier. Thank you for your virtual attendance and your virtual attention today. And now I guess Sarah Beth may have questions for us, and Judy can jump in too from off screen.
Well, I have a question for you both, just because I also have always been a fan of works on paper. What are there any tips or advice to people that are interested in paper? Because I know it can be sometimes a little problematic. So are there any tips or advice that y'all would have to other collectors if they're interested in going down that road?
And I want Judy to get it. I know Judy's pointing to me, says, no, you take it. I don't want to get on here. I think one of the things is you've got to train your eye. You've got to train your eye when it comes to buying any kind of art. But I don't think people should be scared of works on paper. I think people tend to shy away in part because they know that light can harm them, and that sometimes works on paper have been in old mats, so there are mat burns. That doesn't scare us, and it shouldn't scare you. There are many conservators around the state who can help you by conserving the works, and you get them framed archivally. You display them. I know our friends who are museum directors and curators cringe because we've had a number. We tend not to rotate. We have many works in our collection. We have a number of them that have been up for years, which they probably shouldn't be. I understand that, but I don't think you should, don't be scared. Just jump in. You'll learn. But do pay. Yeah, that's right. Don't hang them in direct sunlight. Try not to hang them in direct sunlight. Yes, because that'll fade them pretty fast.
That's a nice segue, because we do have a question about that. How do you ensure the works you have on display in your home are protected? And how are you storing ones that are not currently on view in your home?
That's a great question. The ones that are not on view currently are stored. We have flat files, and we store them between glassine, acid-free. Sometimes they're in acid-free mats. How do we protect the ones that we display? We always, when we frame them, and most of them we've framed, not all of them have we framed. When we frame them, we always put some kind of UV glass on them, which helps minimize, but doesn't entirely eliminate the harmful UV rays from both light, just natural light, as well as artificial light.
For sure. In your own print collection and in general, which artists do you consider the most talented printmakers?
Oh my gosh! Judy said which medium, but I would say that'd be like asking a parent which is your favorite child, or grandchild. Something like that. There's so many, and that's one of the things collecting works on paper has allowed us to build a very deep and broad collection. We have I've lost count, but probably over 100 artists, maybe 150 artists represented in our collection. We like the regionalists a lot, so we tend to like the men and women who produced art in the 30s and 40s in the North Texas area, Dallas, Fort Worth, and that area, the Fort Worth Circle, the Dallas Nine, the Texas Printmakers Guild, the women who are there in Denton. But I don't want to slight the artists from Austin or San Antonio or Houston or El Paso. Well, I said Fort Worth Circle, but Fort Worth, but yeah, definitely that we have artists in our collection from all of those places, and we like them. But yeah, we may have a slight preference for the regionalists from here in North Texas.
Okay, last question for you both. If you'd like to share your sources, where do you find most of your works? Are you buying from auction, mix of dealers and auctions, private collectors? And have you ever purchased any at the CASETA Art Fair? And for those of you real quick, typically our symposium and our 2022 symposium will have this. There's always an outstanding and quite lively art fair that goes along in conjunction with these seminars. So, but yeah, if you could answer that for us.
Yes to all of those places, all of them, yes. And yes at the art fair, and yes of dealers, and yes auction, and yes privately. What we don't do, what don't we do, honey?
We don't buy from the internet.
We generally don't. We don't buy directly from the internet, but I've found a number of things over the years on the internet, and then I will call the dealer, and we'll talk, and we'll send it out on approval. So I don't do like an auction on the internet, although I guess we've done it once or twice when we've been out of town, a heritage auction or even David Dyke's auction, and can't make it in person. But
Yeah.
I don't like to buy without, as Judy says, I like to be able to see it first because we like to evaluate the condition for ourselves. So, and yes, we like to buy it unframed if we can. I think this is probably it because I don't want to cut into the time. I want to hear what Noe Perez and Lynn Castle have to say too.
Well,
thank you all very, very much.
Thank you both so much. We really appreciate it. Okay, so next up, we're going to have Lynn Castle joining us. And Lynn is currently executive director at the Art Museum of Southeast Texas, which I used to work. So Lynn is a huge supporter of Texas art and just an amazing person to work with and for. She's held that position since 2000. Previously, she worked in different capacities within the organization as interim director, curator of exhibitions and collections, and the registrar, demonstrating her dedication and commitment to the museum through service for more than 30 years. Ms. Castle has overseen general operations of the museum, researched and developed exhibitions, organized interpretive programs, and produced publications. In addition, she has solicited and secured funding from corporations, individuals, and grant funding agencies. She also is a member of the American Association of Museums, the Texas Association of Museums, and the Downtown Beaumont Cultural Arts District, and is a recent past president of the Rotary Club of Beaumont. Ms. Castle holds a BA from Colorado State University, completed coursework at the American Institution of European Studies, and pursued graduate work with emphasis in museum studies at the University of Denver. So Lynn is here today to share with us a work from Beaumont. So let me share my screen real quick and I'll turn it over to you, Lynn.
Okay. Can y'all hear me? Hear me? Yeah? Okay. Well, I selected David Cargill because I see him as one of Beaumont's treasures. And David, just to give you a little bit of background about him, I know a lot of you probably know who he is and know him, but just to give you a little bit more background about him, he was born in 1929, so he's 92 years old, and he still is very active. He sits on our acquisitions committee and he makes artwork every day still. And his education, he actually started out as a pre-med major at Rice University, and he went there for 2 years from 1946 to 1948. And then from 1948 to 1951, he changed his major and changed schools. He went to the Pratt in Brooklyn, and he graduated with a bachelor's in industrial design. And this is important to note as I get further on in my talk. And then in 1955, he received an MFA in sculpture from the Cranbrook Academy in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. He's had a relationship with this museum since its inception, which was in 1950. We started in 1950 as the Beaumont Art Museum. And David has worked in primarily two styles all along. He's worked in sacred work and secular work. But you'll see crossover in some of the work that he does that's sacred if you look at his work, and then some of the work that's secular. There's a nice dovetail of the two styles. The title of this piece is called The Importance of Being Mary. And the reason that I selected it is because I think it has a very interesting provenance. And just to give you a little bit of background about Mary, of course, David did a lot of, like I said, a lot of sacred work. And Mary is a central figure in the Catholic faith, and her life illustrates how God works in our lives. And Mary she came from a very simple background, but yet she was called by God to fill a very extraordinary role, that of becoming the mother of Jesus Christ. And David was not Catholic, but he was Lutheran, but he did a lot of work for the churches in this area, like 5 churches to be specific. And also, women were also very important in David's life. His wife, Patty, was a painter, and his daughter, Ida Catherine, is also Patty's no longer living, but his daughter, Ida Catherine, is also a painter, and she lives in Arizona and paints every day. And then remember that he was a pre-med major. Well, his other daughter, Chancel, is a medical doctor. So she went on to become a doctor, probably with the guidance of her father. This piece was originally commissioned by Wei Wei Hoffman, who was one of the founders of the museum back in 1977. And it was to launch a fund drive for a sculpture garden. And it was purchased for $4,500 in 1977. And I got on Google just to see what that would be today. You know, they do the calculations of the inflation and so on. It'd be $20,000, which was a lot of money in those days for a small museum, the Beaumont Art Museum, to purchase this piece. Next slide, please. So here is the piece that was installed at the Beaumont Art Museum in 1977. And actually the museum moved 4 times, and this was its 3rd home. And it was a historical home, for those of you that may know Beaumont, on the corner of 9th and Ashley Street. And that home still sits there today. And this piece was purchased to start, it was the first piece that was purchased, commissioned, to start a sculpture garden outdoors. The home sits on a city block, and it's beautiful grounds. There's a lot of grounds, and there's lots of big oak trees. And we used to have a big fundraiser there called Kaleidoscope. And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I remember Kaleidoscope. I remember hearing about that, because people would come from all over the state, and then artists would show their work. But anyway, they wanted to start a sculpture garden. And so this was the very first piece that they purchased. And when this museum was built back in 1987, then this piece moved with the museum with the rest of the stuff. And it was installed in the back of the museum in the cafe courtyard, which, if you can imagine, if you haven't been to this museum, it's kind of shaped like an H. And the cafe sits in the crossbar of the H. And behind that crossbar, there's a big courtyard. And so the piece was installed out there so that people could look outside and they could see the sculpture that was right outside. But it's relatively small. It's about 5 feet tall, and it's delicate. So slide 3, please. So then in 2005, this piece was stolen from the back of the cafe. And we had no idea what had happened to it, but the then curator had the fortitude and the insight to go and look at metal reclamation yards. And when he went to the metal reclamation yard, he said, you know, he shows up and one really close to the museum and said, did you happen to see any metal sculptures come into no, we haven't seen anything like that. And so he sort of like peeks over the guy's shoulder and he said, I think I see it back there. It's like in 3 pieces back there. So yeah, they had actually, and so he got $60 for this sculpture that had showed up at this metal reclamation yard. So we got it back and we called the police, and the first question from the police was, well, don't you guys have security cameras out here? I'm like, no, they're really expensive. And no, we don't. Well, we did get security. We now have security cameras outside. And it's amazing what you will see on those security cameras at night if you're in downtown Beaumont. But anyway, so we contacted David and we were like, you know, how should we go about getting this restored? Should we go to a metals conservator? And he said, well, you know what, actually, I'm probably the best person to restore it. And remember from the first slide that you saw that it was nickel plated bronze, and it was very shiny. So when David got to restoring it, he said, you know what, I don't think that I can restore it to its original condition, because there's bits of the bronze that are peeking through that nickel plate, which is like what a nickel looks like, kind of silvery, nice patina. But there was bronze that was peeking through that. So he said, what I'd like to do is go ahead and put a black patina on it, and I can restore it for you for $17,200. And so we had insurance, obviously being an art museum, we had insurance, we got the insurance claim, and then it took him about a year to restore it. But when he returned it to the museum, it didn't have a platform. So it has, and I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but it's been sitting at the museum without a platform since 2005. So that's quite a while for it not to have a platform. Platform will cost about, we thought, David estimated about $1,000. But fast forward, David is 92 now, not really interested in creating the platform for it. And so we did talk to him about it, and he decided that the best thing that we could do is get a marble base for it, or a marble platform for it. And so just this last week, I had someone from a monument company come and look at the piece, and so we've selected the size and everything. We got the bid, and it's going to be about $3,900 to have that done. So I'm going to be writing grants and soliciting for donations for that. And David is a lot like Medellin, and it was interesting to listen to Dr. Castro say that in his observation, he's never noticed anybody that had so much versatility as Medellin. Well, the thing is that David Cargill is the same way. He did all these commissions for churches, and he's worked in cast metal. He actually built his own foundry, which I think is amazing. He used to have his sculptures cast in Italy, but it was such a major undertaking to get that done that he actually built his own foundry right in his backyard. So this piece was actually cast in his own foundry. He also did welded steel. He bought a piece of marble when he was in Italy in 1950, and he finished it in 2021. So he worked on it for 70 years, a big block of marble that he had purchased from Italy. And he also carved wood. So he was also a very versatile artist. For those of you that live in Houston or visit Houston, I would recommend that you go and see his Stations of the Cross at St. Basil at the University of St. Thomas. There, you can see how creative David is, then that he had a very limited space to work in. And he actually recessed the sculpture within the walls. And so he made a cast, and then he had him actually put him in. So make sure that you go and take a look at those. They're very, very impressive. Slide 4, please. So here is the piece fully restored. And like I said, we're looking for a base for it. And the other thing is too, like Medellin, David did stained glass windows. And you can actually at the St. Jude's Thaddeus Church, which is my church, as a Catholic church here in Beaumont, Patty Cargill, his wife, designed all of these windows. And then David said, I don't think it's going to be that hard for us to put those up ourselves. So they fabricated these huge windows and put them up. And so he's done stained glass too. And I'm not talking just like little wimpy stained glass. I'm talking like use Blanco glass, and the glass is like an inch thick, and they chiseled it and shaped it. And they're just absolutely gorgeous. So if you're ever in Beaumont, please come and take a look at those. And finally, just so that you guys can fully appreciate David Cargill, I would recommend that you Google on YouTube David Cargill, and there's 2 videos out there that I would recommend that you watch. And one of them is called The Lighter Side, and that's actually spotlighting the exhibition that we just closed here at the Art Museum. It was up for 3 months. And then also Mike Patterson, and then also Beaumont native and now lives in Houston, Joan Steinman, created a video, and it's David Cargill. And if you just look at the date, at September 15th, 2021, we actually did a screening here at the museum of that. So you can see that wonderful video about David and really appreciate all of the work that he's done in Beaumont. So, but like I said, because we just had this show with David, there's a very strong and renewed interest in his work. And so we feel like this piece needs to be, we need to have that base built. We need to get it out on view. And hopefully the next time you come to Beaumont, we will have it up. And we're planning on we're going to keep it inside because it's delicate. And it also doesn't show up that well outside because it's 5 feet tall. It's not big enough to be outside, but we're going to put it in the West Hall, and it will be probably in a fairly permanent spot with that big granite base that's being built for it. So anyway, so if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Lynn, thank you so much. That was fascinating to hear about. And I mean, that's really cool to learn more. I've seen a lot of David's work and spent time with him at his home, but I don't know that I've ever heard that story or anything like that. So, well, a couple questions have come through. And also just for everyone to know, Caleb is dropping links to the videos that Lynn mentioned
Oh, wonderful.
feature. So if y'all want to save those on your
Thank you, Caleb.
to watch those later. So
Good.
one question I had, and just for the people not as well versed with Beaumont, is where all can they see, if you can give like a quick, more pieces of David's work in Beaumont or around Texas that you might, I know you mentioned one in Houston and one more in Beaumont, but.
Sure. Yeah, there's actually several spots. So we have 2 other pieces by him in our collection at the Art Museum. And he's also at the Beaumont Public Library. We also have a piece, The Men of Vision. You remember that piece, Sarah? Is outside in the parking lot. It's 4 men, and it's actually a tribute to the Rogers brothers who started TSO Optical. He's out also at the Children's Medical Center in Dallas, Texas, the Dallas Zoo, Edison Plaza in Beaumont, Entergy Plaza, Forest Lawn Memorial Park. He's at St. Anthony's Cathedral Basilica, St. Elizabeth's Catholic Church in Port Neches, St. Jude's Thaddeus Church, which I already told you about, but his art is full. That church is full of his art because he did the baptismal font. He did a large Jesus at the front of the altar. He actually carved the doors going into the church, and then he fabricated all the stained glass windows that Patty. I really think that's probably his most representative work. And then he also did a commission for St. Michael's Antioch Orthodox Christian Church in Beaumont. And then he also did a commission for St. Andrew's, which is outside as well. So there's a lot of them all over town in Beaumont. And we actually have a driving tour that we put together too that has all the different stops that you can see us. He did a large bust of Marabou Lamar that's out at Lamar University as well. So lots of major commissions.
So there's a lot over there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One viewer has asked, is there a gallery that represents his work, or how do you find a David Cargill if you were interested in purchasing?
So, well, Foltz Fine Arts has represented him. I don't know if they have any pieces on view currently. The best way really is to make an appointment with David and come to his house. He has we borrowed 51 pieces for our exhibition, and I would say that probably 40 of them came from David. And it's fun to go to his house anyway, because he has them all outside in his yard. Like, he has a sculpture garden of his work out in his yard. And then he's also got a bunch inside as well, and maquettes, and just his house is actually, our collectors club is going to go there in November to visit his studio so people can see.
It really is a treat to go there.
Right.
Yeah, he's a great host. And I remember the first time I went, one of the things that I found his pieces were amazing. And Patty was still alive the first time I went over there, but was their book collection, because he and Patty used to buy, at least what I remember he told me, is that with the art history books, these vendors used to come to the different schools and everything. And so they could buy like tons of these books. Some of them are limited edition now, and everyone knows those books are quite pricey at points. And it was just like just walls of books everywhere. And so you feel like you're in this like library / treehouse, just this beautiful
it is kind of a treehouse like atmosphere. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, because there's like windows and you look out around his pieces. So a question I have about his work in general, you mentioned that, he did the conservation on the Mary piece, and then, but is that something pretty common that with him, like he cleaned or conserved quite a few of his pieces, or?
That would be a question for David. I cannot state strongly enough how he is a master of multiple mediums and how he figures out, and I really kind of attribute it to his degree, his undergraduate degree in industrial design, that he is able to repair, restore. Who builds their own foundries? Like, who does that? There's like a couple of people I know that have done that, but then move on to stained glass, and then carve wood, and then carve marble for 71 years. To me, it's amazing that he can do anything. He's figured out all of these things on his own. It's just, he's incredibly resourceful for an artist.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Lynn. It was a delight. And correct me, is the exhibition still on view?
No, I'm sorry to say it just closed. We're in installs right now. We're going to be putting up Carlo Magno, Pedro Martinez. So yeah.
Great. But y'all do have some of the pieces in the foyer still, and then this piece
Right.
will eventually be
We've
on
got
the-
our bicycle girl, and hopefully if we get the money, 3,900, we'll get this piece out and on view. It's become more urgent, like I said, since we just closed the Cargill exhibit.
Well, you've got a captive audience of art supporters, so
Yeah.
it's a good spot to get that message out. Well,
Yes.
thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us.
My pleasure.
Okay, so I see Noe coming up here. And Noe, I will introduce you and then we'll let you take it away, similar as the others. And I just want to say, thank you to Noe. Not only has he agreed to come on and be one of our noontime presenters, but he also was on our programs committee for the fall forum and helped a lot with preparation for this and is one of our dedicated board members. So thank you, Noe, so much. It's a wonder how you do all of those things and keep up with your fantastic art career. So we really appreciate it. In case you don't know, Noe Perez is a contemporary artist living in Corpus Christi. Born in Falfurrias, Texas, Perez's art education began in his teens, studying with local artists and later attended workshops of the Plein Air Painters of America. Perez focuses on the South Texas landscape, and his work is influenced by the San Antonio School of Early Texas Impressionism, including Julian Onderdonk, Jose Arpa, Dawson Watson, and Porfirio Salinas. Quote, most of my work is done in the studio from photographs and plein air studies. I believe that plein air painting is an essential exercise for any landscape painter. I paint outdoors whenever I have the opportunity, end quote. Okay, Noe, so I'm going to share my screen and turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. So, as Sarah mentioned, I'm a painter. I do not have any formal education, but my education really has been studying these early Texas artworks, like the one that you see here by Porfirio Salinas. When I was studying and really trying to make something out of my painting, I used to, and I'm talking early 80s, I'd go to San Antonio and look for artworks by Salinas, Wood, all the ones that Sarah mentioned. The one that I always looked for was Porfirio Salinas, and I'm not sure why he resonated with me, perhaps because he was Mexican-American and, there was not a whole lot of that for me to look for other than in Salinas. And then later I found out about Arpa. But so when she asked, well, hey, would you talk about a piece of artwork? I knew that I wanted it to be about Salinas, and Bonnie Campbell and the Now Collection were very helpful in offering their works. So I chose this one here. It's called Road to Hondo, oil on canvas, 30 by 36. So it's a pretty good size painting for early Texas artworks. I believe that the first time, and I was not able to verify this, but I know there was a Salinas exhibit at the Institute of Texan Cultures in 1982 that it was a fantastic show. A lot of the really classic Salinas paintings were there. I got to go and visit that exhibit on the last weekend that it was up, and it was fantastic. And it really made an impression on me. I think that was the first time that I saw a collection of paintings of this magnitude that, like I said, it made an impression on me. So as I said, I don't have formal education, but I had some education from some local artists and that sort of thing when I was growing up. But once I left home, it was basically studying works of art and seeing why they resonated with me and trying to figure out what they did that spoke to me. One of the things about these early works, being from Texas, obviously they resonated with me, but more specifically, this painting right here, to me, it's so believable. It makes me feel like I've been there. And I think there's when I look at it, I can look at it purely as a beautiful painting and enjoy it that way. But my tendency is to also look at it and analyze and say, why is it that this thing speaks to me? It makes me feel like I'm there, like I can tell the weather. It's probably late afternoon. Obviously it's in the late spring, the cactus are blooming. And everything is placed perfectly. When I see it, I see there's a road that comes in from the right on the lower part of the painting. And as you enter the painting, to me, that was his way of allowing us to enter. And as you follow the grade of that road, it's almost like it's dipping a little bit. So you're kind of you're accelerating a little bit as you come through. But before you get too far, you meet this cactus and the big oak tree. So they stop you. The cactus obviously is the center of interest. So to me, there's several little tricks that he uses. Can you show the next slide, sir? He places the cactus right in front of the big oak tree. First of all, the blooms are red, which is the complement to all the other greenery, all the other greens in the painting. So you're going to stop there. But not only that, he places it in front of the darkest dark in the painting, which is that oak tree behind the cactus. And even the branch that we see there on the top of this slide, it's almost got like a little pitchfork at the end of it. It curves down again to point toward that center of interest, which is the cactus. You know, like I said, I try to analyze why these things work and really pick up on it and learn how to use these tools. The next slide, please. Here we see he's got this little mesquite that is against the darker oak in the back. And again, to me, that's a great tool, because what it does, it establishes the color of the oak tree and it establishes the color of the mesquite. And then elsewhere in the painting, now where we see those colors, we automatically know, you know, he could just put a dab of that green on the mesquite in the distance without any detail. And we would know that would read as a mesquite bush or a mesquite tree, because we've already seen it in detail up ahead here. And I like doing that a lot in my paintings. I like paintings that have mesquites, that have oak trees. And I thought I had come up with that, but looking at this painting, I'm reminded that I probably stole that from Salinas. Just one of the many things that we do. Next slide. And here in the foreground, at the bottom of the, kind of toward the left of the painting, he's got these, it's just a big mass of grasses that really have very little detail on them. The only thing we see, and I hope that that it comes through on your screens, there's a little bit of kind of highlight on the top of the big mass, and it's ever so slight detail, and yet it reads very well. It reads right, but also, since there is so little detail there, we look at it and immediately just keep going. So we don't stop here. This is not really important. I mean, it's important to the composition, but he is directing us further on. Also, on the very top left of this slide, you see what I think is a cactus pad that has fallen, kind of that blue that we see reflected there. You know, one of the things about Salinas is that I think he had just a great sense of observation and retaining those observations that he made in the field and putting them in his paintings. And I don't know, I've never read a lot about whether or not he was a big plein air painter or not. From what little I've seen, he doesn't strike me as a big plein air painter. I'm not saying that he never did it, but he's always neat. In the photographs you see of him, even the paintings, I think there's a kind of a structured neatness to them. To be a plein air painter, you got to get out there. It's windy, it's messy, there's bugs, it's hot. I don't see him fitting into that very well. Now, what I have read, there's an interview that his wife, his widow did, I believe in 1982. And she makes reference to a notebook that was filled with sketches. My impression was they were pencil or possibly ink sketches, and that he would go out and record little details, of a cactus or a tree or weeds or bushes or this cut bank that we see here. And my guess is that he used that and incorporated those in his painting. But I'm thinking he went out with pencil in hand, or like I said, maybe pen and ink. Next slide, Sarah. So, to me, when I see this beautifully composed painting. And, when I was starting out, I used to think, well, sure, these guys, they have the landscape. They have, I grew up in South Texas where everything is flat. You basically have a tree line at the distance, and that's as far as you can see. And it took me a while to kind of realize that maybe he didn't see this scene exactly as we're seeing this painting, but he was able to compose it. And I think that's where Salinas' strength really, really lies. I mean, obviously he had the facility with a paint and a brush, and there's no argument to that. But I think where he excelled was in going out and recording when he was seeing, then coming into the studio and composing a scene that is, maybe he didn't see the whole thing as we see it, but he has put it together and made it so believable that when we see this scene, it even makes me feel like I've been there, and it probably isn't even a real place. So that, I think the ability to do that is really where his strength lies. I think that Michael Grauer called this painting one of his 10 favorite early Texas art pieces. The painting was part of the A.C. Cook's the Hawk Shop collection. And I know it went around the state in several exhibitions and so on. So, I mean, it's been out there. People have seen it. It has been written about. And I happen to have some inside information. I know that there's a book coming out later this month that includes an essay by Dr. Ron Tyler about the Texas landscape tradition. And when he mentions Salinas, I believe this is the image that is in that book. So obviously a wonderful work of art that I think everybody agrees on is pretty special. That's all I got, Sarah.
Noe, thanks for sharing that. We got a couple of quick questions here for you. In your talk, you mentioned studying with local artists. Can you tell us who they are and kind of those times that you shared together? Yeah,
Probably there was a lady who was a school teacher in Falfurrias, and her name was Miss Butler. That's all that I recall. And as I mentioned, she was a school teacher, and she would teach workshops, after school and so on. So as a junior high student, I know that I took a couple of workshops with her. And basically, she taught me, this is a brush, this is your medium, here's your paint. You can dilute it and paint a wash, or you can go thick, or here's how you stretch a canvas. I mean, the very basic stuff, but really, the very basic stuff that I'm using today still. So, and then there was another lady named Campbell. That's all I recall. I think her name maybe was Alice Campbell. And she was from Corpus Christi. And she would go down there sometimes during the summer and teach a workshop or something. And I remember taking a workshop with her as well.
Great. Of course, we're all excited for your upcoming solo exhibition at Foltz Fine Art.
Yeah, I've got a show there that'll open first weekend of December.
Okay. Any other shows in the works?
Well, yeah, I'm going to be in an exhibit at the Whitty also that opens in December. So paintings of the King Ranch.
Okay. But it's my understanding they're doing a book on that as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that's the book that I was alluding to when I said that Ron wrote an essay. So yeah, there's a publication that should be out this month. I'm told by the end of the month, we should have a book in hand.
Okay. Well, we're all looking forward to it.
As I am.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us. I think we're going to take a quick couple of minute break, and then we'll be right back at 1 to take a look at the dealers and galleries. But thanks for everyone tuning in.